AI's role, the architect or the intern?
The CEO every day.
Oh, snap. Hey, Karl, how's it going?
There's so much going on, Erum. It's all good. I want to welcome our listeners to the Grow Everything podcast, where we talk about how biology is changing all industries. What's up with you?
Oh, man. Yes. Very busy over here. Just been trying to maintain. If you've been watching the podcast, you might notice that I've got a little haircut, try to freshen up my look a little bit, but that's halfway done. I might color my hair. So for those that care, I'm sorry. For those that don't care, apologize for talking about it. But yeah, that and just trying to exercise. I did a Pilates burn class and I don't know. I mean, I don't really keep New Year's resolutions or think about it, but I think I'm doing it subconsciously. I'm like, why am I doing all this stuff?
So it's always an interesting time of the year if you're a gym rat, because the gym fills up with new people and they're all pretty much gone by the end of February. But you started, so I will encourage you to continue the habit. I think it's a very important habit to
Okay,
maintain.
hold me accountable. Hold me accountable.
Yeah. So let me just jump into a couple of things before we get into the episode. I wanted to mention this over $1 billion deal that Eli Lilly did with a German therapeutics company called Seamless. It's a gene therapy deal that's focused on hearing loss. And this deal struck me because you wouldn't think that you could do gene editing to take care of hearing, but there's a lot of diseases out there that are genetic. And this is one that apparently is worth a lot of money. So if you could imagine being able to program mutations that people have that are related to hearing loss or blindness or other diseases that people have, this is a great example of this. And Lilly's already making tons of money from their GLP-1s. So I'm very excited about this. What do you think, Erum?
Yeah, I need to look into it, but I'm curious, is this gene editing on somatic cells or like sex cells, like the gametes? Like, so then the future children will not have hearing loss.
So I am looking at a Bloomberg article, and what's interesting is Lilly has a hearing loss portfolio. Back in 2022, bought a company called Okuos for $500 million. And that really helped them get into this area of treating hearing loss caused by genetic mutations. The example that they give is 2 years later, so in 2024, they did an early stage trial and they used these drugs on an 11-year-old boy who was able to hear for the first time in his life. So that particular drug from Akuos is now probably moving to phase 3 trials. And Seamless is a different kind of technology platform. But to answer your question, I don't know. And this article doesn't say exactly how this works. I can't wait to read more about this. And I think it's, we talk about biomanufacturing and bioindustrials on this podcast. But when I see these kinds of news stories, I get very excited because it just shows how quickly biotech is advancing and really treating things that matter.
Yeah. I mean, on the flip side, some people might argue that it's moving very slowly because gene editing has been around for quite some time. And there's still a lot of controversy around it. That's why I asked about the somatic cells versus the sex cells, because it's like, okay, well, is that the stepping stone to design our babies? Regardless, gene editing is a tool. It's actually more precise than other drugs to help alleviate, I don't want to say disorders, because some people that do have hearing loss are fine. They're okay. And I just feel like there's maybe some that are like, you know what, I'm okay living my life without hearing things.
Yeah, it's just as an interesting aside or a New York City experience is taking the subway down from the Upper East Side at the end of the school day and ending up on a subway car with children who are coming from probably a school that is for the deaf or the hearing impaired, because the train car is silent except for the sounds outside of you. And what you're seeing is a bunch of people signing at and with each other. And it's really an amazing thing to see and to experience, because I think generally we don't think about how many people are affected by hearing loss. But when you are seeing that many people together in one place, particularly children and teenagers, it's pretty striking.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. And of course, when you're on the train, we listen to podcasts. And for our listeners, I don't just listen to our podcasts, we do make it. I listen to different types of podcasts. And there was one that was recommended to me recently by our friend Ginger Dozier, founder of Biomason and founder of the Biome Consortia. And she does amazing things with biology. Kind of the big thing Biomason does is make cement out of microbes, which we'll talk about in today's episode. So you've been friends with Ginger for some time. We've had her on the podcast and I've caught up with her, and she recommended this podcast called Long Now, which is the institute for people to think on very long timescales. And there's one episode which we have to put in the show notes. It's really almost like a TED talk, and then there's Q&A afterwards. So this was a beautiful explanation of how biology can solve a lot of problems. So we need to have Dr. Lynn Rothschild of NASA on. So Dr. Lynn Rothschild is a scientist, astrobiologist, an evolutionary biologist, synthetic biologist, has all the expertise of someone that we must feature on our podcast.
God, we got to get her on.
Yes, yes. And so a lot of her work focuses on the origin of life on Earth and what's going on in space. And then, of course, pioneering the use of synthetic biology to enable space exploration. And then, of course, a lot of what she talks about is, well, there's so many things you can do with synthetic biology. Of course, that would have applications here on Earth. So that's the kind of the nuanced story of space exploration where people feel like, oh, why are we focusing on space when there's a lot of problems here on Earth? But it's a win-win if you create a technology that can enable both. Let's just focus on innovation rather than speculate on who is it being used for. But it was a great episode.
I love the Long Now Foundation. I love what they stand for. And I'm going to have to check out this podcast. Going to the Long Now Cafe in San Francisco is one of my favorite things to do when I'm there. It's really a magical place. But I definitely want to check this out. And I think we maybe have had Lynn Rothschild on our list, so we've got to just reach out to her. And speaking of space exploration and synthetic biology, you put down Pluribus, and we've talked about it a couple times, the show that is on Apple TV, created by the same people that created Breaking Bad. Now that we've both have watched it and the first season is over, what do you think?
I'm like, when's the second season coming out?
Right. It did kind of end suddenly.
Yeah. It was amazing. And again, no spoiler alerts, but it is about this collective consciousness that takes over most of the human population. And then there's a few people that aren't a part of the collective consciousness. They're still living their lives as they were before this collectiveness started happening. And it's like, what is that a commentary for, right? Because of this collective consciousness, like all of a sudden you have most of the world's population, it thinks the same way, like they're part of the same mind. And it absorbed everyone's thinking. So everyone now is an expert in a field. They just can tap into everyone's storylines, their expertise. And to me, I saw it as an allegory to obviously the internet and AI, and that we can all access it and use it. So I was like, okay, is there a moment in time where we'll just all have access to all the same information? And it does make things better for the individual, because that's a part of the narrative, is that this collective consciousness is trying to convince some of the people that didn't get into it to come into it, and saying that it's a very beautiful experience. But of course, as an individual, you want to hold on to your identity so closely, so tight, it's you. And if you go into this collective consciousness, is it death? And then all of a sudden you're reborn? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, what do you lose by being part of the collective consciousness? I think that I like using the allegory of AI, like the collective consciousness is AI. But the challenge there is everybody gets that collective consciousness without requesting it. And it is like a genetic story from the beginning. So there is some biotech related things going on. But if you don't have the free will to choose whether you want to be a part of the collective consciousness, I think that that's really the question there. There has been in the past talk of how the internet and how even AI create this collective consciousness that is greater than all of us individually. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, but I just think that there's pros and cons to free will.
Okay, yeah, that's really great. Can't wait for season 2. Again, love how there's biotech or biology being portrayed in different ways in media to help spark people's imaginations. And I think this was a really good one. If you really want to think very deeply about what is biology and what can we do with it in a very philosophical way, our episode with Michael Levin, I cannot stress enough, is a great one. So I think we should just keep that episode in our show notes in perpetuity.
We're going to talk about biomanufacturing, and since we're talking about media, I just want to mention too the second season of Drops of God, which is about the wine industry and really understanding wine. And it's such a beautiful season. One was so beautiful, so well done. I thought it was just going to be like a limited series, and it would just be that first season, which is apparently based on a manga. But they just dropped a new season, which is just as interesting, and I'm only 3 episodes in, and I think it's just lovely. I love it. It moves very slowly, but if you're into wine and you're into biomanufacturing, great show.
Wine or flavor, I mean, just really, it's about flavor and earth and being able to taste the fruits of our planet in its like natural form, I guess you can say. And obviously, fermentation doesn't just happen naturally. I mean, in some areas it does in a really like gross way, which is like rotting fruit. But then it's like this beautiful combination of, all right, nature does bring a lot of flavor to plants and herbs and grapes, of course. And then humans take it and to the next level in cooking and fermentation. And that is really a great segue to talk about what we're talking about in today's episode, which is biomanufacturing. How do we take biological matter and make something incredible, useful for humanity?
Exactly. So we are approaching this episode as a biomanufacturing 101. We think it's going to be analogous to the episode that we did around DSci. It's going to be a little different in that Erum and I are going to talk, but then we're going to bring in quotes from different people who we've had on the podcast to talk around specific areas related to biomanufacturing. So if you don't know what biomanufacturing is, or if you really need a refresher, this is the episode for you. Erum, let's get started. What's going on? Why biomanufacturing? Why does it matter?
All right. Yeah. So here we are talking about biomanufacturing one-on-one. And one of the ways that we wanted to frame it, we wanted to borrow from our friend Joshua Lachter, who we just had on the podcast. He's a company synonym that focuses on biomanufacturing tools. And so what he wrote about was the great reformulation. And what is that about? So a lot of our products that we use every day that we find everywhere. I mean, the things that we consume on a daily basis, furniture, materials, a lot of things that we use are made through petrochemistry. So we think of things that are plastic, food dye, a lot of artificial flavors and fragrances. And it's so tremendous when you take a look at all the products. Just pick up something in your house and look at what ingredients it's made out of, especially when you're looking at laundry detergent or shampoo, personal care and beauty products. And you're like, why? And there's a lot of reasons why, especially when you consider how and why the petrochemical industry started.
I would just add to that, you're probably wearing something that has some synthetic molecule in it. You might have a pair of underwear that have a stretchy band. That's probably made from oil. You might be wearing a pair of yoga pants. I'm not today, but I do wear a tracksuit sometimes. And that is definitely polyester, and polyester is made from oil. Even the ones that are made from recycled materials are typically made from oil. So this idea of why do we need biomanufacturing? Well, we need an alternative to the creation of all these products from oil. And that's what biomanufacturing is.
And so this idea of using petrochemicals actually, when it first started, was a green technology. We were very dependent on using trees for making a lot of different products, especially when it came to fuel to make fire, to heat our homes. But then all of a sudden, people discovered petrochemistry or petrol or oil and were able to make kerosene and other types of fuel. And instead of chopping down trees, we finally have this other way of making heat that technically is greener because you don't have to chop down the trees. And so that's one aspect. Another aspect I like to think about when it comes to how we became so dependent on petrochemicals is, of course, there's the oil industry and they're producing this raw material that we can make. And then we have all these chemists that became very interested in how to transmute, I guess you can say, transmute petrochemistry into different types of products for different types of experiences or functions, you can say. And there was, of course, during these world wars where a lot of chemists were then asked to make different weapons, chemical weapons, and they made different things that were used in warfare, unfortunately. But then they had to set up a manufacturing process for that. And then they had it after the war was over. And like, well, we can make this stuff. What can we now use this infrastructure and these processes that leverage petrochemistry? What can we make out of it? Oh, well, you know what? We can make some laundry detergent, or we can make plastics or coatings, which is coatings is a whole like invisible world that is everywhere. Everything's coated in some type of petrochemistry based coating, like a clothes, for example. Look, we can't vilify petrochemistry because it really helped us kind of get away from chopping down trees and made the modern world. But then, of course, now we're in this place where we overdid it. And I hate to laugh at it, but it's just like, wow, that we kind of came this far. And now we see, all, of course, all the environmental effects. We all know this, right? And chemistry isn't the only way to make products. And this is when we want to talk about biomanufacturing.
So, what is biomanufacturing? A simple definition is the use of biology, microbes, cells, enzymes, to make things that we currently use. And that could be anything from beer, wine, and yogurt to chemicals, materials, and products. Let's let Doug Friedman of Biomade give us his take on what biomanufacturing is.
In reality, it's actually quite simple until you get into the details. And that is manufacturing chemicals, materials, or other products using biological systems. And sometimes it's easier to compare and contrast. So how do we get chemicals, materials, and other non-biological or non-health related products today? Primarily through chemical manufacturing. Chemical manufacturing is primarily taking typically a petroleum-based feedstock, using chemical processes to then turn it into something that is useful for people. In biomanufacturing, we're essentially doing the same thing. You could use a petroleum feedstock. You can use a gas feedstock. You can use a lot of other feedstocks from other renewable sources, corn stover, sugar beets, etc., and convert that now using a microorganism like E. coli or yeast or many, many others, typically using fermentation, just like brewing beer, to ultimately get the exact same products, or in some of the more exciting cases, new products you can really only make with biology.
So, what's the opportunity when we move from just using petrochemicals to using biotechnology? In the past, we've referenced this report from a coalition known as the Advanced Biotech for Sustainability Coalition. And we've also referenced a McKinsey report from several years ago. And according to those reports, biotech could remove something like 3 to 4 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere. But what does that really mean? That's like basically taking every car in the United States and in Europe off the road. And biomanufacturing could unlock $1 trillion market by 2040. To put that into context, $1 trillion is every plastic bottle, every polyester jacket that you're wearing, most building materials, every detergent, every ingredient that goes into cosmetics, all of the stuff that is made from petroleum or that is derived from petroleum is remade with biology. That's $1 trillion market.
And speaking of reports, one of the reports that we talked about extensively on this podcast is one by the consulting firm Capgemini. And they did a lot of work talking to executives from all the top companies in the world to understand what they think of biomanufacturing, the use of biology when it comes to transforming their industries, their products, and the way they operate. And it turns out when they were talking to these executives, 95% of them are pursuing biosolutions. They're not just talking about it, they're really actively looking for it. And there are lots of reasons why they're either going ahead slowly or they don't. And that's something that we want to talk a little bit more about. What is slowing things down or stopping the pursuit of biosolutions?
And so what we're doing in this episode is, yes, biomanufacturing 101. What is it? How does it work? Why it failed and why things are different now. So let's talk about the most basic type of biomanufacturing.
Yes. So the most basic type of biomanufacturing is fermentation. So a lot of you are familiar with fermentation, of course, because during COVID, we all became sourdough focaccia makers. And of course, yogurt is made through fermentation, beer, wine, and it's been going for thousands and thousands of years. So that is the foundational, I was going to say platform, but that's too technical. And I think we want to honor that fermentation is a biological process.
And then what's happened really over the last 50, 100 years is fermentation has become much more precise. And one of the things that happens is we've gone from precision fermentation to continuous fermentation. When you're brewing beer, that's called batch fermentation. You fill the vat with your ingredients, you ferment in there, you remove your beer, and you start over again. Precision fermentation is where you've engineered a microbe to make something very specific, not just alcohol, a medicine, or a material, or a chemical. Continuous fermentation, which is where you have fermentation that just happens continuously. You're feeding the microbes, they're producing product, you're moving the product out of the vat. And a person that talked a lot about this was Michelle Stansfield, who she called this hyperfermentation. So let's let Michelle talk about what hyperfermentation is.
So hyperfermentation is a continuous fermentation technology. And ultimately, if you think of any manufacturing method, when you go from piece by piece assembly to an entire assembly line or a moving assembly line, it ultimately drives up productivity. You get more product, which then drives down cost of goods because it's getting more product per energy unit that you expend in the manufacture. So continuous fermentation really changes the way that we move and we manufacture through biology. So when you think about incumbent technology, what they do is in a big stainless steel vat, they add sugar and microbe and a couple of little and a Berocca or a couple of vitamins. And they grow those microbes until basically they're senescent, until they're older and they've eaten all the sugar. What we can do with continuous fermentation is we can feed them in a manner that keeps them at a certain age. So we all know that teenagers are a lot more productive than old people. So we can tailor manufacture so it keeps the yeast at a specific, very productive age. And we can do that for a very long period of time. We don't have to stop the fermenters and clean them every time. We can just keep going.
So the key insight there is that continuous fermentation can really help unlock costs, which is one of the biggest things when it comes to replacing products. With continuous batch fermentation, you can continuously make the product versus having to take all the stuff out and clean it, wait, and then do it all over again. That downtime is very expensive. But thanks to Cauldron and other companies, we're excited to see that, okay, we can continuously make product. And there's another type of manufacturing that would enable costs to come down because you're able to make product continuously. Do you want to talk about another type of manufacturing?
Sure. I mean, we've had a couple of people on the podcast who've talked about cell-free manufacturing. And what that means is they're taking cells, breaking them open, and removing the machinery that does all the chemistry that enables fermentation. And this could be done by taking those enzymes and adhering them to a wall and then passing a broth through this fermentation tank and having chemicals come out on the other end. The reason you would want to do this is because cells get sick or they waste energy. You have to feed them. And when you take the cell out of the equation and you really only have the enzymes that are doing the chemical processing, you can create something that is much more efficient without the biological baggage.
We also spoke to Alex Rose about cell-free manufacturing and what that is according to his perspective.
Really, the idea of cell-free is to take this assembly line inside of microbes, which inside of microbes is alongside hundreds, thousands of other assembly lines, reactions going on. It's a chaotic environment. But taking that assembly line that you care so much about, that's doing all the work, and just isolating it and focusing on that. What you get with that is higher purity of the product you're creating and a number of other benefits, such as moving to more continuous flows, allowing you to get better yields, dropping the cost down of doing the reaction.
But there are other ways to do biomanufacturing. It's a very broad spectrum. And once you start going down that rabbit hole, you realize we just scratched the surface of how we can do biomanufacturing. What we've been talking about is fermentation using a microbe to make a molecule. But you can also, of course, use plants, insects, and mushrooms.
So let's listen to Alon Sobel talk about how they grow plant cells and use them as bioreactors.
We've developed a platform technology where we can take pretty much any plant in the plant kingdom. We take the plant once. We understand exactly where inside the plant are the cells that produce the critical phytonutrients or phytomedicinal compounds. We take those cells and we conduct hundreds, if not thousands, of experiments where we change the food that we feed the cells, we change the temperature, we change lighting, and a number of other variables. At this stage, we focus on getting these cells to do two things. One, to grow the exact mirror of the phytonutrients that are found in the plant. Two, focus on one or two molecules that we look to increase by an order of magnitude versus what's found in the plant. We're just changing the environment. We're optimizing the environment for the cells to do what we want them to do. In an industrial scale bioreactor, we're talking north of 1,000 liters. These are cells in liquid suspension. So you take it from a petri dish in solid media to liquid suspension in large industrial scale bioreactors. And we figured out how to condition the cell to be able to, in a way, toughen it up, make it stronger so that it can go into this liquid environment, can deal with all the challenges of shear forces, can multiply many times. And in 18 to 21 days, the cells grow and they elicit those critical phytomedicinal compounds. And then we harvest the cells and we're left with an amazingly soluble, bioavailable end compound.
And then finally, you don't necessarily need a tank or a vat or it's a liquid medium to make products using biomanufacturing. There's also ways to use mycelium to make products. And it doesn't have to be in a vat, it doesn't pour things out. You can just grow mycelium to make products. And our friend Evan Bayer of Ecovative and My Forest Foods does a wonderful job of explaining how they make products using mycelium.
The journey for us the past 4 years has been scaling up what is a very novel solid state fermentation process that can be done on existing farms. This is truly an unexplored way to grow mushroom mycelium. This aerial slab of meat that forms across this 100-foot long bed is just an unknown way of doing it. And a lot of the things we had to figure out at scale, and that means putting 80,000 pounds of wet wood chips from a tractor trailer load on conveyor belts into these farms, growing the product and really dialing in operational consistency based on all the work we've done at lab scale, pilot scale, quarter farm scale. But every time we do this, we're creating these giant boxes, these thermodynamic boxes. It's a complex generative pattern where the mycelium responds to the environment.
So why does this all matter? Well, as we talked about, we want to be competitive when it comes to a price point, particularly if you're competing against chemicals that are being made through petrochemistry. And if you're competing against those synthetic chemicals or petrochemically produced products, you need to have price parity. In addition, we're looking at these technologies because regulations are changing around the world and people are looking for new ingredients because of the way those regulations are changing. And then finally, a great reason to be looking at fermentation and biomanufacturing is to create new products that have never been made before that people will be excited to spend money on or to use. So those are all reasons why biomanufacturing matters.
Okay, so now let's talk about why it's hard and what needs to happen in order to make it easier for us. So there's been a lot of companies that have been using biomanufacturing or fermentation and all the different ways that we just talked about. And when it comes to price is a funny thing because it's a framework in which you have to produce products and create value so that when people purchase the product, everyone wins, right? And so what's been happening is between companies creating products and being able to commercialize those products and getting into the market, there's been what we call the valley of death. So if the technology works, why isn't everything already bio-based?
So it's complicated. Let's just put it that way. And I think it's worth putting some historical perspective on this story in terms of like why it's a challenge. And it really between the year 2000 and 2023, the entire bioindustrial industry learned some really hard and expensive lessons that have really informed where we are today. First being the biofuels bust, which is really a tale of companies ignoring, scientific companies ignoring economics. The original pitch was, hey, let's produce petroleum fuels using fermentation, but it was super expensive and you were going up against a commodity that is heavily subsidized, that is oil. At the time of the biofuels boom, oil was very expensive, but then the cost of oil crashed and biofuels were too expensive to produce and they couldn't compete.
Yeah, I mean, the biofuels bust, I would say, is the first thing that people point to when you talk about biomanufacturing and commercializing bio-made products.
At a large scale.
At a large scale, yes. And they're like, oh, well, biofuels failed. And for all the reasons you just mentioned, they failed for very specific reasons. But there are other companies that have employed biomanufacturing to make other types of ingredients or molecules that are fundamental ingredients to make, let's say, cosmetics and personal care and beauty products and textiles. And those companies have also failed for similar reasons. They're really trying to go after large markets. They're competing against cheaper products. In front of the podcast, Veronica Breckenridge of First Bite Ventures and her team wrote an incredible report called the Graveyard Report that analyzes over 60 failed companies when it came to using biomanufacturing and how 80% of them were targeting biofuels or platform chemicals. So let's let Veronica Breckenridge talk to us about the lessons learned.
I think the biggest pattern, I have to say, and unfortunately, I feel like this gets repeated every time. It's people who don't understand how to introduce technology, which is to go after the biggest and most commoditized market. I mean, biofuel was that way, right? And a lot of big ideas, and we talk a little bit about Silicon Valley playbook and software. They keep talking about the biggest market. But you know what? In manufacturing, the biggest market is not your best market because the biggest market tend to be commoditized. It's extremely cost competitive because consumers are extremely cost sensitive. And there's existing structures that already optimize the manufacturing to get to that kind of efficiency and cost. New technology rarely gets there, right? Apple didn't introduce a $100 phone, which is when Apple introduced iPhone. That was the average phone cost. Apple introduced a $600 phone, right? Tesla's first car is a $200,000 Roadster. And it's the same thing, actually. If you look at the EV, there's, lots of EVs started with, like Bolt, started with cheap cars. That is never the right strategy. Introducing a new technology and new manufacturing that requires a lot of experiment, and which means you want to find lucrative markets and higher price markets, which is why biomanufacturing in pharma or drug production has been successful, is actually being more and more adopted.
And I think to add to what Veronica said, let's talk about the challenges in infrastructure. It's very unclear what infrastructure is available for biomanufacturing. And Synonym, who we've had on the podcast twice, has done some work in mapping global capacity. If you don't have a place to produce your product, it's kind of like finding a server before there was Amazon Web Services. There is no shared infrastructure for piloting. But China has announced plans to support pilot biomanufacturing plants across 47 companies by 2027, so in a year. And Veronica, among others, has been talking about pilot facilities here in the United States and in Europe. You can't prototype at scale unless you have access to facilities. So let's have Edward Shenderovich of Synonym talk about the need for capacity.
On different levels, people are saying that they need capacity on the pilot scale and they need more of it. But what I realized after is that it's not that the capacity doesn't exist. There's just a lot of friction in getting to it. And same with demo scale, and same obviously with industrial scale. And on industrial scale, we definitely don't have enough capacity. But we also don't have enough mature science. There's a capacity gap, but at this point, it's a perceived fermentation capacity gap. There's a lot that needs to happen for that gap to become real on the science side, on the engineering side, and also on the offtake side. So the markets need to be as ready as the science, and the capacity to produce needs to reflect the state of the market.
Amazing. So we talked about a lot of why biomanufacturing has failed for certain companies, but let's talk about some of the solutions that are coming online. What's the new strategy and what's a new infrastructure? And what we talk about a lot is the consumer and how oftentimes when you're introducing a new ingredient or molecule, there's the performance over sustainability solution. Well, you're not just chasing commodity pricing, you're chasing specialty high value products. So, of course, here at Messaging Lab, we love to talk about K18 Hair, a company that we've worked with from day one. And K18 wasn't just talking about sustainable hair care. It was talking about a biotech or biomimetic peptide that can repair hair in 4 minutes. And this performance is what drove their acquisition by Unilever. And this is one of the great entryways of validating biomanufacturing because people will buy products that work for them.
Not only will they buy them, but they'll also pay a premium for them because the K18 products are not by any means cheap compared to other hair care products on the market. And part of the reason why people will buy those products is because they deliver on the functionality that they've promised. And let's let Savine talk about K18.
So your K18 peptide was not just about finding a natural molecule and then applying it to hair. It was actually about taking that molecule, reassembling it, optimizing it to serve the needs that nature had not intended for your hair. It's simply intended to keep your hair healthy. But when you talk about harsh chemistry, you're talking about heat styling and everything else, how do you create that molecule from the nature which is optimized to service that need? And that's where biotechnology checks all the boxes: purity, sustainability, biocompatibility, and innovation that we seek from the beauty industry.
So we talked about how innovators have gotten their products to the market, and it's by no easy feat. This requires a lot of collaboration across different types of people we like to call along the value chain. So you're talking about people that are manufacturing, people that are distributing, people that are marketing. And this brings us to the next solution in biomanufacturing, which is orchestration beats invention.
This is something that we've talked about a fair amount here on the Grow Everything podcast. And we recently interviewed Phil Morle of Main Sequence Ventures talking about orchestration. That means connecting the scientist, the company, the manufacturer, the brand, the waste manager, everybody simultaneously, and creating an entire ecosystem. Let's let Phil Morle talk about how Samsara has done this.
This sort of first principle of orchestration. We did not find a great founder exclusively and then just put them to work to build a company on their own in their own isolated environment. We knew that we needed to understand exactly how the supply chain works, and we knew we needed pull from a customer that would actually set the momentum very early on in the company's life. So we created this company under a model we have here at Main Sequence, which we call venture science. We call it venture science because when we talk to a research organization, we say this is how venture causes great science to be created inside your organization. And then we co-found companies with founders that bring advantage from the first day.
So we just heard from Phil Morle about orchestration of a value chain. In today's world, supply chains are global, they're vast, and usually there are certain chains that are in one location distributing to many locations. But this brings us to solution number 3, distributed biomanufacturing. And what does that mean? It means that we could biomanufacture, having the tanks, having the whole factory regional close to where the products are being sold. Karl, I know that this is one of your favorite topics. What do you think?
So when I think of distributed biomanufacturing, I think of smaller facilities that could be located on site next to a big company, but not necessarily. And these manufacturing facilities can be located anywhere in the world. And given that they would be connected digitally, you could have different strains of microbes available to produce different products. You could basically turn the facility on to produce peptides 1 minute and produce hydroxy acids the next minute, depending on what the customers to the facility need. And instead of having one massive factory that is shipping ingredients or products all over the world, you have many smaller units located near feedstocks or near the factories that are the end consumers. 2 examples that we've had on the podcast are Mango Materials and Lanzatech, who both locate at waste sites. Let's let Molly Morris of Mango Materials talk about what Mango Materials is doing.
We partner with a wastewater treatment plant to have access to the site and have access to the methane feedstock. We have a pipe that comes directly off that. We take that pipe and feed it into a tall, deep tank that's full of water and where our bacteria live. And the bacteria, like me or you, if we're to eat a lot of chocolate or something, we would get fat. These bacteria, instead of eating chocolate, they eat methane gas. It's their carbon source, their carbon feedstock. They eat the methane and they convert it to their carbon storage mechanism, which is a PHA, stands for polyhydroxyalkanoate. It's this naturally occurring biopolyester that's inside their cell walls. It's how they've evolved to survive famines, similar to us getting fat. It's a similar process. And so they've accumulated this biopolymer inside their cell walls. We harvest that biopolymer, comes out looking like a white fluffy powder, and that's one of the key ingredients for the pellets that we then sell onto the market. Instead of having this methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, instead of having it be flared or vented in some instances, we feed it to our bacteria to make materials.
And the vision for both being able to turn waste into products and also the idea of distributed manufacturing is shared by another guest of ours, Gabe Tavas of Symmetry Wood, who talks about fab cities and what that could look like in the future. So let's let Gabe take it away.
There is this whole idea of fab cities where basically you have as many of your products as possible made locally from waste, especially, and then you have information shared globally. So ways how to make new biomaterials or make new products become a bit more open source.
And then finally, another approach that I've mentioned a few times on the podcast and we've had listeners write to us about is kind of a more dirty biology approach where we move away from sterile tanks, moving away from this pharmaceutical grade stainless steel tanks towards more robust microbial consortia that can operate in non-sterile environments. Think of agriculture where you plant a seed in the ground and the seed is surrounded by hundreds of millions of microbes and fungi that are helping it grow, or a wastewater containment plant where the water is being treated and purified and there's a lot of different microbes at play there. Let's let Ginger Dozier talk about growing cement bricks as an example of dirty biology.
We're actually creating an environment that's similar to seawater so that you have the right amount of nutrients and the right amount of calcium and carbon sources for calcium carbonate or crystallization to start to form. So that became a very easy way to explain it. Of course, we had to hone on like, what do you mean grow? How does it know to stop? There was a lot of very quick ways of explaining, well, you're taking aggregate and you're inoculating it with bacteria. And then by doing that and activating the microorganisms, that starts a reaction. And in the presence of calcium and carbon and nutrient, you start to get the build out of calcium carbonate, and it just starts to grow around the individual bacteria. And then that bacteria connects to the other bacteria, and then those biofilms connect to the aggregate particles. So you're essentially gluing and stitching everything together and making it more dense. It's not growing outward like bread. It's essentially becoming more dense.
Amazing. So now we learned about different types of solutions, the new strategy and the new infrastructure for biomanufacturing. But once we make the thing, where does it go? So now it's time to talk about the market and what is the bio-better reality for the consumer.
So on the one hand, as we've talked about, performance over sustainability, meaning that consumers in some cases are willing to pay a premium for a product as long as it performs, but the product has to be better. The example that we just mentioned was K18. K18's products are premium priced and consumers buy the products. Even though the products are very sustainable, K18 doesn't sell on sustainability, they sell on performance. Erum, you and I just talked about different green products that we buy, and some work and some don't.
Yeah. For example, I use compost bags because I like to compost and not trying to be high and mighty that, oh, look at me, I'm composting. It's something that New York City has set up infrastructure, at least in Brooklyn, to be able to compost in a way that is manageable. And the way I do it is that I put my compost in a compost bag and then I put it into the compost bin provided by New York City. And the thing is, though, the compost bags that I had originally purchased at a premium weren't very good, kind of fell apart a little bit. And I'm just like, oh my God, these are like ripping. And this was like when I bought them like earlier. And then now I bought a new version of it and it actually was cheaper and actually works better. So the reason why I wanted to bring up the compost bags and, you mentioned laundry detergent is that oftentimes we hear that no one's going to pay a premium for products. We have to get the costs down. And I think a lot of that depends on the context. Maybe people won't pay more money on laundry detergent, let's say, but there are people that will. And so you do see both products on the market still to this day. It's not like, we tried green premium and it didn't work. It still is working. Is we're just taking more time to adopt. And as long as it outperforms. And performance, of course, can mean so many different things. It could mean, for example, in the world of laundry detergent, being able to clean clothes better, like getting all your stains out, while also maintaining the texture and the performance of the fabric that you're washing in cold temperatures. So there's a lot of levels of performance. And then, of course, having perfumes that don't irritate your skin. So there's like not only a green premium, but there's a health premium. I personally, and this is maybe my PHI, my personal health information, is that I get a skin irritation. So I have to have fragrance-free products. But I do like fragrance. So once we start seeing fragrances that don't cause skin irritation, I'm buying it.
Yeah, and I personally am also willing to pay a little premium for products that have superior performance characteristics. And I am a huge fan of laundry detergent sheets. I didn't think I would be when I first saw them, but to me, they make a lot of sense. They are more expensive depending on who you're buying them from, but I find that they do perform as well as a liquid detergent. So I'm a big fan. But on the other side of this bio-better reality is, what is the CPG side? What do the really big companies say about performance or bio-better? Let's let Amy Trejo of P&G tell us what they're looking for when it comes to biomanufacturing.
There's one thing that really defines what makes something stick, and it's pretty basic. It's about performance, right? And so in order for a consumer to use and to love your product over time, it has to perform for her, right? That's the real advantage that we have with biotech going forward, and where we will see things that do better in the marketplace and are successful will be driven by the performance that it provides to the consumer. And if you can deliver on that, then they're going to become loyal to you and to your products, right? But it has to deliver. And I think that biotechnology can be a really huge enabler of that going forward, because there is a lot of potential there to provide performance that exceeds the incumbent materials that we have today and provide better delight and improved product performance than where some of the materials today have been.
So the big challenge for dealing with very large CPG companies is they need consistency, price parity, and proven supply chains before they're willing to reformulate their products. Where do consumers and big CPG meet? Well, consumers want performance, but they also want products that are economical, that they can afford. CPG companies need scale and they need reliability. They also need performance. Biology or bio-based products have to deliver both to win. And biology can do this. We're seeing it over and over again, and we're seeing it more and more. The companies that are succeeding now understand the intersection between consumers and big companies. They're not selling sustainability, they're selling true solutions. Sometimes those are better performing solutions, sometimes they're equivalent solutions, but they are selling solutions, and that is what matters today.
And that's what we talk about here on the Grow Everything podcast. And for those that are tuning in for the first time, please listen to all our episodes, because that is where you're going to get into the nitty gritty of the different products that are being made through biomanufacturing. And for those that are listening, hope you got a nice review and refresher of all the things that we've talked about when it comes to biomanufacturing. And it doesn't stop there. We wanted to be able to still talk about what's the next level of biomanufacturing.
Why does this matter now? Well, there's three forces converging. Technology costs continue to drop exponentially. And we've seen this in gene synthesis and gene sequencing, where the price drop is even more extreme than Moore's law, which is the law that people use to talk about how the price of computation drops every 18 months while the performance continues to increase. As Erum mentioned at the start of this episode, 95% of executives interviewed in this Capgemini report say they are pursuing biosolutions, and consumer performance expectations continue to rise. And then finally, infrastructure is being built. Synonym has mentioned this. We've had a number of guests on the podcast come and talk about what they're doing to build the infrastructure. And these distributed biological manufacturing models that we mentioned earlier are coming to fruition. These are becoming reality.
We can't mention technology without mentioning AI, of course, and to be able to harness all information that we have as a human population and being able to understand the patterns, understand the reasoning, understand how to be able to make bio-enabled solutions, how to set up biomanufacturing in a way to make exceptional products. And again, it ranges, it's everything. Of course, it's what we talk about in the podcast. And that, I personally think, is going to unlock some novel molecules, some novel products, things that we couldn't even imagine. And I like to point to, let's get wild. Let's get a little wild here, Karl. What could be made through biomanufacturing if we know how to harness it? I like to talk about bioluminescent products, and hair dye being one of them, being able to have bioluminescent paint, stickers. I mean, I know there's glow-in-the-dark stickers, but other types of ways to leverage bioluminescence, I think, is going to be an exciting product that's manufactured. Let's let Andy Bass of Glowing Oceans talk about bioluminescence.
Just imagining how can we use nature in our consumer lives. And I saw bioluminescence in the ocean for the first time and was like, can I make a living light out of that? Along that path, people were asking, wow, this is really interesting. What does it eat? How does it grow? And we thought, well, it eats sunshine. It photosynthesizes like plants and it grows by cell division. And we realized, wow, this is a gateway into the world of biology for inquisitive minds.
So to close us out, Erum, what do you think? Where are we going with biomanufacturing?
Well, I would say that there's a big opportunity here. If we're going to take a look at all of the molecules and ingredients and products and materials that are made with petrochemistry and how biomanufacturing could replace some of those, not all of them. Petrochemistry, again, as we said, is not a horrible thing. It does a good job. It did a great job for when it first came out. We kind of overdid it with it. But if you do the exercise of looking at what petrochemistry is making today and how biomanufacturing can change that, you're going to find a world of opportunities that are very lucrative.
Yes, biology is the most advanced manufacturing technology we have on the planet. It's been doing research and development for more than 3 billion years. And our job is just to build the hardware to harness it and learn from what nature has given us.
Amazing, amazing. And since it was just us two kind of giving these perspectives, reintroducing our guests from the podcast to give their perspective, we figured let's just have a little fun towards the end. And so for this part of the quickfire questions, what I'm going to do, Karl, is I'm going to ask you a couple questions, then you ask me a couple questions, and then we can both answer questions that I have listed here. Okay, Karl, stainless steel or dirty bio?
I'm the big dirty bio fan.
Amazing. Why?
That's another episode.
Who would you have fix a startup? Rick Rubin or Tim Cook?
I think Rick Rubin.
Especially in today's environment. I hear
you. All righty, Rem, let me ask you a couple questions. Terraform Mars, cyanobacteria or mycelium?
So cyanobacteria for sure.
Okay, Erum, space travel, one-way ticket?
Not for me, but for some people, I would highly recommend it. I'll leave it at that. Keep it diplomatic.
So now let's ask each other these. Okay, I'll ask the first one. Erum, 2035 bioeconomy, luxury goods or commodities?
I'm going to say luxury goods. And if luxury goods means also skincare products and beauty and personal care products overall, hair care, things that are a little bit more pricey than what's available today, only because people will pay for novel experience. And I believe that biomanufacturing can provide that. What about you?
I'm going to say commodities. I think we're seeing some really interesting signals right now. And I think the commodities produced by biomanufacturing is going to accelerate and really be in a very nice place in 2035. Okay, number 2, funding, Wall Street or Dow?
Oh, yeah. I want to say DAOs, which are distributed autonomous organizations. Look it up. We talk about it a lot. And really why I'm picking DAOs is because it enables more citizen science. enables value being generated and shared amongst people that participate in creating products. And I hope that that is the future of funding. And I think it's a beautiful way, once you get it right, to be able to have DAOs fund products.
I would say Dow for innovators and for specific point solutions, and Wall Street for infrastructure growth.
Okay. And then finally, I'll ask you this question, but I'll answer too. AI's role, the architect or the intern?
The CEO every day.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, we're going to be working for the AI.
Oh, man. Yeah, you know what? I guess you're right. But hey, as long as I can, be in Hawaii having my drink on the beaches, I guess it's fine. I mean, if it's doing all the work. But I still think there's a place for humans to be the creative drivers of all of this. But hey, look, we could be the board members and AI can be the CEO and it can report up to us. So if that's the way we're saying it, I love it.
All right. So this has been a special episode of the Grow Everything podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our take on biomanufacturing.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow. Thank you so much for listening to the Grow Everything podcast. Find us on all streaming channels. People, text us, ask us questions. We do answer. We do actually also have a phone number, so we would love for you to give us a call and let us hear your voice. All the information can be found in our show notes. And of course, we have to say subscribe to our Substack and make sure you watch us on YouTube. So thank you so much again for listening. I hope that you continue to grow.